Thanks, Ken, and thank you for the invitation to come speak. It's been an interesting journey. Writing the book. It wasn't something where I set out necessarily to be an author or to end up in meetings like this, but you never know where life's going to take you. As a very wise old philosopher, which I just learned is a comic character, once said, I've met the enemy and he is us. And I think that's probably one of the things that led me to write the book, is that as with the Tea Party movement, you just kind of get to a point where you just have had enough and you need to do something. And to quote, actually, Edmund Burke, among others, actually this quote goes back to Plato in various forms, but all that it takes for the triumph, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. So I got fed up enough with the state of affairs that I wrote a book. And what really led me to write the book was that I got tired of watching the news and hearing how much better things are getting. I have so many friends, as I'm sure to all of you, who are over 45, educated, hardworking, talented, and experienced, but have somehow found themselves right-sized, outsourced, downsized, etc., who have not been able to find a job in even a Home Depot for years. To me, that doesn't say things are getting better. I hear statistics like, oh, the unemployment rate is improving. It's only 7%. And I said, well, it doesn't make sense. How can our economy, how can our employment situation be improving if we keep seeing all this happening to so many people? You see kids coming out of college taking a year to find a job. Talented, motivated, hardworking people taking a year, 2 years to get a job. And this isn't people who are just coasting on their unemployment. These are people who want to work, who hate getting an unemployment check. You know, it goes against everything they were raised on. You know, ironically, I always said I'd rather, sell pencils on a corner, which is kind of how I make a living now. I have an internet store that sells stylus pens, so it's not all that different. But I finally got to a point where I said, this is a load of crap. I've got, somebody's got to do something. I just need to at least look into this. So I started to look into, what do the unemployment numbers really mean? Because for a lot of people, I know that personally watching them, it feels as bad for them as it felt for my grandfather in the Great Depression. There was just, you're at the end of your rope. You watch the news, and this is one of those things that just intuitively you see that it just seems like more people are losing it. There are more shootings, there are more suicides, there's just more people reaching the end of their rope. And I think all you have to do is watch the news, which I refuse to do anymore. I'll go seek out the information I want, but I've gotten to a point where I can't even watch the news because it's either disconcerting or it's infuriating, because you're listening to, a bunch of propaganda. So anyways, I started to look into what does unemployment really mean? And that was an enlightening experience. Because unemployment, you would think, bears some relationship to our population. It would make sense that a percentage of our population, or at the very least, a percentage of the people of working age. So I started doing a bunch of research. So I said, okay, well, we have roughly 317, 318 million people live in this country. How many of them are working age? 16 to 65. Forget how many people do we know that are working to 70, 72, 75 by need. And I found that just 16 to 65 is roughly 250 million people. So I said, okay, well, that must be the workforce. People able to work. And say, okay, we'll back out students and people who are disabled, unable to work. Obviously, that's reasonable. So that number's got to be, you know, some factor diminished from 250 million. Then I found out that the U.S. workforce is 155 million. I said, okay, where's the gap? So when we talk about unemployment, we're talking about a percentage of the workforce, and that workforce is a highly arbitrary number. So basically, there's an old story of a couple of people interviewing to be the CFO of a big company. And who knows if this is urban legend, but they're interviewing with the CEO, and the CEO says, okay, as a final question I have for you, after all their interviewing, what's 2 plus 2? And of course,
the punchline, I'm sorry.
yeah. Well, the first two people, of course, say, well, 2 plus 2 is 4. The third person says, what number would you like it to be? Guess who got the job?
The third person.
Of course.
And he's a lawyer.
Well, yeah. Well, we can go down that road for a long time. But that's the problem with the numbers. You know, the media loves to put out all the feel-good numbers. Well, sure. All we have to do is reshape the workforce, and then the numbers look better. So, in any case, if you take the workforce number and take that out of the, shall we say, able-bodied workforce or the available to workforce, we have this gap of 100 million people. Almost 1/3 of the country is of working age, but is somehow not in the workforce. All right, now we can take out of that 12 million college kids. Obviously, that makes sense. We can take out of that anywhere from 10 to 20 million people who are legitimately disabled. Just physically or emotionally, just incapable of work. That's more than fair. But then we start to get into certain other numbers which are really kind of twisted. Like if you've exhausted your unemployment benefits, don't have a job, can't find a job, but aren't collecting from the government, you're not unemployed. That was the one that really got me. So today we have roughly our unemployment 7% plus or minus of the 150 million plus or minus that is the workforce. But then you have another half again who want nothing more than to work, but they can't find a job. And I'm talking any job. And I know these people personally. Again, that's what inspired me to go on this mission. So real unemployment is more like 11 or 12% of the workforce, mind you, okay? And then the other one, and this is a really, it's amazing when you pour over volumes and volumes of spreadsheets and statistics, trying to find the common thread, the aha moments that you find. One of the great ones in the Bureau of Labor Statistics is, and this is a category, people who are able to work but don't want a job. That was a really good one. That is somewhere around 80 million people. plus or minus. 80 million people don't want, now granted, there might be 20 million out there that are millionaires, well off, retired, don't need the money, okay. But we're still talking, no matter how you cut it, somewhere 40 to 60 million people that are not contributing to our economy in any way, shape, or form. They may not necessarily be taking from it, but they certainly aren't contributing to it. So the first thing that made me nuts and got me to sit at the keyboard for countless hours was unemployment. My grandfather lost his business in the Depression. He was a jeweler. He and his father in the roaring 20s, very prosperous time in this country. And the Depression came along and they lost everything. He didn't say a word till the day he died when he was 84. He worked until he was 84. Eventually became a jeweler again, a watchmaker, and the little local town watchmaker fixed everybody's watches. And the WPA came up. So he just walked in, they handed him a shovel, and he went and dug ditches for 5 years. He didn't dig ditches for EBT cards and lobster and whatever else you could buy with the 3 or 4 EBT cards that are pretty easy to get. He did it for $5 a week. That $5 a week had to buy whatever meat, produce that you couldn't buy, grow, or hunt, and coupons. And the coupons were good for specific staples. Flour, sugar, powdered milk, powdered eggs. I mean, basically all you could get with these coupons was powdered something. But guess what? They made do. My father grew up in that. He was born in 1932, right at the height of the Depression. And he learned that you want anything, you work. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember he would say, you know, you want a new pair of sneakers? Get a job. I don't care if you're 7. You know, snow day wasn't, for me, a snow day wasn't, okay, get out the PlayStation or the Xbox. Snow day was, okay, break out the duct tape. Okay, because we had to tape my gloves to the jacket and the boots to try and keep me some amount of not dead. Because that meant out the door, and of course my mother's got me by the back of the neck, till 8 o'clock on the nose in the morning. Because if I dared knock on one of my neighbor's doors before 8 o'clock, I would be killed. And I knew that I had to be home at 8 o'clock at night, because if I knocked on any of my neighbor's doors after 8 o'clock at night, I'd be killed. But in that 12 hours in between, I shoveled every driveway, every walk, everything I could find. I had 2 folded up tuna fish sandwiches in baggies in my pockets that were more like tuna fish pudding of some sort by midday, but that was what I had to eat, because you can't come home for lunch because, you know, that's time away from shoveling snow. Now, to me, that was a great day. I loved a snow day, not because I wasn't in school, but because I could be out working. And that stuck with me. So like many people today, I cannot imagine, and I'm fortunate enough to have my own company and skills and connections that I have options for how I can make a living. I can do some consulting, I can run my business, I can do different things. I'm very, very fortunate. But I cannot imagine somebody who works in a trade, works in an industry that is highly skilled, highly educated, but cannot find a job.
Thank you, Chris. Now,
in any economy, there's all sorts of things that are trickle-down effects. So the unemployment, to me, while it's a painful situation, still to me is a symptom. I said there had to be something else going on in our economy, some other glaring statistic that nobody wants to talk about, and it has to somehow equate to jobs. Well, I looked at about every statistic there was. One of the big ones, you know, you hear, oh, the GDP, gross domestic product, the measure of our overall total economy, you know, that holy, holy number GDP. Well, tell you what, all you have to do is let the population grow, especially in a consumer economy, and your economy grows naturally. So I looked at GDP, but then I looked at it per capita, per person. If you look at the GDP, our gross domestic product, and you divide it by the population, for more than 20 years, the GDP has grown at twice the rate of per capita GDP. You know, when everything around you is growing and you're not, you know, it's kind of like prices going up 3% and your cost of living increase on your Social Security goes up 1.5. It just sooner or later, it just gets a little harder and a little harder and a little harder. And while per capita GDP doesn't tie to personal income directly, it certainly does tie to how much money there is in the economy total to be spread around between companies and jobs and industries. So I said, well, where's that going? And this was the thing that really was the aha moment. I looked at the trade deficit. And we have, in the last 20 years, imported $9.5 trillion more than we've exported. Okay, $9.5 trillion. Okay. Now, if you take an economy, you know, economists, you know, I would love to have a debate with an economist because they, you know, they'll run off into theories about Keynes and Friedman and every other economist. And I say, well, fine, that's the science. You know, I can do the math, that's easy. Tell me how that translates to something practical. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to take an economy and I'm going to put it in a vacuum, and I'm going to take a little town, or better yet, a tribe in the Amazonian jungle. And they got about 100 individuals. And picture these 100 people surviving for a couple centuries as a community. Now you have some people are the hunters, some people are the farmers, some people take care of the kids. It's a universal cooperative society where everyone's needs are met because everyone contributes. But what happens if all of a sudden you take 10% of the food you grow in the shall we say the community farm, and you just give it to another community that wants it? Doesn't necessarily need it, but they want it, so you say, oh, great, all right, we're going to take 10% of our corn, we're going to give it to you. So everybody here in our community is going to go on a diet. You used to have a nice, even, balanced 100% of what you needed, no more, no less, but now you have to deal with 90%. Say, okay, I can do that. But these other people are going to buy stuff from us, right? Well, no. No, we're just going to give it to them. Now next year, we have to go on another diet. We're going to do 90% of our 90%. And year after year after year after year. Till all of a sudden, where's all our corn? Why are we so hungry? You know, you just kind of wake up and you say, well, it didn't seem like that big a deal. It was only a little bit. Well, guess what? For the last 20 years, we've taken $400 to $500 billion and sent it offshore somewhere to someone who said, thank you very much, and have a nice day. Now, some of the traditional economists would say, well, eventually it all evens out. If you go back to, say, the 70s, call it the, I hate to use the word predator, but the nation that took greatest advantage of our kind-heartedness, if not naivete, was Japan. Japan was Sony and Nissan and countless companies who made cheaper products than we did. If you go back to, for any of you who remember buying a 1973 Datsun 280Z, okay? The trick was to get your 80,000 miles out of it before it fell apart. Because the rust, sooner or later, turned it to dust. You would just walk out one day, you'd put the key in the door, and there was a little pile of rust. But they were cheap. Now, what happened was, you take Japan, who had an economy roughly 35% the size of ours, we keep buying enough Japanese goods, sooner or later their standard of living comes up and equals ours. So our gift, one of our gifts to Japan, was we gave Japan an economy equivalent to ours. Of course, that hurt us for a while. It put all the U.S. Electronics companies out of business. Can't buy any electronics unless they're military electronics. Stuff that, you know, we don't want to share. And we gave up half our steel industry. So, okay, yeah, that was the cost. So we'll find some other jobs. We'll find some other industries to get into. And eventually, Japan and the US had the same size economy. Now then Japan, actually very wise country, said, well, we can't compete on labor anymore, so they competed on quality. They remade themselves to be a company that focuses on quality and innovation. But there's this, all of a sudden, we have this thirst for cheap electronics. We can now have more than one TV. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, 19-inch, this thing was, you know, it was a piece of furniture. You bought your TV at the furniture store. That's who sold TVs. My dad was a TV repairman. He was like big in the 50s. He'd come to your house, climb the roof, try and tie himself to the chimney and hang an antenna on your roof so you could watch, you know, the big three, 4, 5, and 7. And, you know, that was heaven. But as a family, you united around that. You know, my father united around the radio when he was a kid. You know, he actually heard Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast live. But it was a family thing. The TV was, you know, wasn't a go hide in your room. Your punishment is you have to watch by yourself, and your kid's like, cool. What wrong can I do now? But it was an investment to buy a television set, not one of 6. You know, in the house, each with its own DVD player and Xbox and everything else you can connect to it. But we became starved. You know, this was the start of consumerism. I can have everything I want, and I can have it all for 12 bucks. That was the beginning. So we then moved to Korea, because that was the next cheap labor market that was capable of building an infrastructure to manufacture electronics and so on. Well, guess what? We were kind enough to elevate the Korean economy. Sooner or later, you know, fortunately, Korea is a smaller country than we are, but, you know, smaller than Japan, so it didn't hurt us that much, again, or so we thought, other than perpetuating our mindset. But then China came along. Imagine what it would take all of us to elevate 500 million Chinese workers to our standard of living, to our soon-to-be, you know, $30 minimum wage. Picture 30 bucks an hour, 20 bucks an hour, even 10 bucks an hour, times 40 hours, times 500 million people. Oh, by the way, India's got another 500 million. Philippines, Malaysia, you know, another 50 million. So, guess what? All that money we keep sending offshore, despite all of our wishes and wants, is not coming back. $9.3 trillion and counting. $500 million a year. You know what that translates to? 5 million US jobs that cost the company $50,000. If you, for any of you have never worked in a payroll department or run a company, for you to make $30,000 in this country costs the company $50,000 a year. So a basic job, but that's still, that's those middle class jobs that have all but disappeared. So 5 million people could be out there making $30,000 a year for that amount of money. But it's gone. What's worse is if you look at certain jobs, certain skills. All right, I'm gonna ask this question. If you're over 30, you can't answer. Over 32. How many of you know what a tanner is? Yeah. Okay. How many of you know what a tool and die maker is?
If you're over 30, you can't answer.
You're over 30,
Yep.
you can't answer.
No, because anybody here over
I'll give you a good one. We have how many techies we have in the room? Okay. How many of you know what a key punch operator is?
Yep.
Okay. Here's all these jobs that are gone. Now, it's not necessarily that the job is gone that's the tragedy, although that is tragic in and of itself. What's most tragic is the skills are gone. We've wiped out entire trades. Tool and die makers. If you want to make toys, you need to know how to make, you need to be able to make plastic molds to make plastic parts. So a tool and die, one of the jobs a tool and die maker would make. We don't know how to do that anymore. See, we at some point got out there and we started saying, rather than lay off the people with lower seniority, my dad was a victim of this when he was 60, we decided that we need to lay off our most expensive employees. So everybody, from this area knows Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC. DEC was famous. They gave so many people jobs that had no skills, and just built this massive company that almost couldn't sustain itself under its own weight. And then when they started getting competition from the PC, they didn't adapt. When they didn't adapt, they started to shrink. So what did they do? They didn't get rid of all the younger people with lower seniority. They got rid of all the people who had the most skill and the most experience, because they cost the most. Well, guess what? They cost the most for a reason. They got rid of all the people who could have fixed the company. So we keep shuffling all these skills offshore along with all that money. So, again, I kept digging deeper. And I'm sure everybody has heard one place or another, we live in a consumer economy. Well, guess what? So do locusts. What happens in Kansas when the locusts show up? Total decimation. Everything's gone. And what do they do when they're done? Do they replant the fields that they just destroyed? No, they just go somewhere else. Consumer economy is not sustainable. Yet 71%. That was a number I just found today. Let me go see if I can find anything interesting that's changed in the last few months since I finished the book. 71% of our economy is go out and buy stuff, which is crazy. And what ends up happening when we go, where do we go buy stuff? Walmart, Target, all the big box retail. So yeah, Why? Because we can get more stuff for that same dollar.
Is that wrong? Is that bad? That we get more for that dollar? What's the difference between somebody's income going up and their expenses going down? Are they still more rich or more
It's, put it
wealthy?
this way, it's easy to justify
It is.
when we don't think of it being at the expense of our neighbor.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay? And that's, see, that's where, you know, when I say
So
in,
should we have not invented electricity because the candle maker would be put out of business?
No.
Because that's at the expense of our neighbor, right? I really think that I'm sorry to do this because I know you're a guest and I'm one of the leaders of this organization, but economic policy is missing from your theory.
not yet, I'm not there yet.
When dollars are sent to Japan, we buy products from Japan or from China in dollars. What are they going to do with dollars? They're not going to wear them. They're not going to. They got to spend them. They have to spend them. It isn't like corn where you send corn to somebody and they eat it and then it's gone. We buy the products with dollars. Those dollars have to be spent, and you have to understand monetary theory to understand that when you spend a yen to buy products, dollars are just pieces of cotton. So you have to move that money through the monetary or through the economy in order to do it. So that money does come back.
Oh, I understand what you're saying, and you know how it comes back? They loan it to us.
Right, that's the problem. But it's
So,
not the
so,
issue that
so they loan it to us, and then we pay them back with interest, so we give them even more money.
Right, so it's the deficit spending. You're right, you're absolutely right, it's deficit spending, but it's not the fact that we're buying cheap products. The fact that we can buy more from China is a benefit to us. It's a huge benefit. The fact that I can spend $700 on a 65-inch television and not $2,000 is because that gives me a net of $1,250 to spend on something else. So I strongly recommend that you study more monetary theory and economic
Okay,
theory.
I have an MBA, I've studied
So do I.
an immense amount of economic theory,
Good.
and what you're ignoring is human nature.
That's right.
I'm not. I'm not. I would.
You're also ignoring the fact that $9.3 trillion is gone.
It's not, because
It's not
$9.3
here.
trillion go to what do people in China do with $9.3 trillion when they spend the RMB?
They buy heavy equipment from Japan and Germany and other countries.
With
Yuan. I mean, they're even
not
talking about
dollars. So they have to do something with
but those dollars aren't coming
What do
back
they
to
do?
us.
So you're saying that they bury them in the ground? They
hold them.
Right, because we borrow from them. The issue is borrowing, it's not spending. The fact is that the government borrows money from China in order to finance our social welfare programs. And that you're exactly right, but what you're missing is not the purchase of cheaper products from China. The issue is borrowing. If we had a zero balance in our economy in relation to borrowing for these programs, it would be a non-issue. Every dollar that goes out to purchase something would come back to the United States eventually.
Well, it hasn't in more than 30 years.
It hasn't.
Since
But
1970.
it's
No,
not the
the
cheaper
government,
products.
the government deficit, the financial deficit, the government's deficit is a completely separate issue.
He's talking about balanced trade, he's talking about the budget. He's not talking
But it's
about
the same. But
It isn't the
not
same.
different from each other.
It is not the same. And if you let me continue,
Okay, go ahead.
if I'm a company making product, selling product, and I put you out of work, are you going to buy my product? You can't. You cannot buy product from me if you have no money. And that's the problem with a trade deficit. We keep putting people out of work, then those people cannot consume because they don't have any money. Unless we borrow it and put it into a government program and then send more of it to China. And exactly, what happens to every dollar you give in stimulus money? It goes to whatever disenfranchised group or legitimately needy group gets it, who gives it to Walmart, and off it goes. Okay, so sure, do I think it's great to save $1,200? When I say in the book, when I put in the title, why the U.S. economy may never recover, that mentality is why. Because you have to let me speak. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Because we will not make that sacrifice for our neighbor. You go look at towns that live based on their manufacturing industry. If you went to Michigan, before Detroit died, and few would disagree that Detroit as a regional economy, as a center of activity, Detroit is dead. Okay? Few would argue that. If you go back before they died, you go back 20 years, try and drive a Honda. You would be killed. All right? Because these people understood firsthand that what they drove bore a direct relationship to their ability to feed their families. You know why Henry Ford paid the best wages and built the least expensive and tried to figure out every way he could to make cheap cars or inexpensive cars so that his employees could afford them? Because if you make a product that your own workers cannot afford, sooner or later, everything dries up. And that's the problem we have. We can't make a decent wage, so we have to buy cheap stuff. We can't buy more expensive stuff. What if, for example, money wasn't an object? And I haven't looked at the studies yet, but they're out there. What if you have more money than God, and you can walk in and you see two TVs and they are identical in every way, shape, and form? Features, specifications, quality, etc. One is $600, one is $1,200. The $1,200 one is made by your neighbor. Even people for whom money is not an issue will buy the $600 TV. Makes sense. It's hard to condemn, but it's killing us. And that's the reality. It absolutely is true.
I don't want to debate you, but it's not true, man. The money saved gives somebody more expendable power to be able to buy other goods. If somebody's more productive, the issue is not the fact that it costs more because of the unions and minimum wage and that kind of thing. That's why it costs more. And that's the issue. The issue is not...
Oh, I won't disagree with you there.
Yeah, that's why it costs more. It's not...
Oh, I haven't even gotten to the point, which, again, the book goes into all these points. All right? Stuff does cost far too much to make here.
Right.
That is part of the problem.
Huge problem.
You know,
But John, the issue is that we've lost the jobs that we are probably designed to do because it's too expensive to do here, but we have not replaced them with jobs that people can do. And so when people are out of work, we have to pay them to not work.
Right, so, but the problem, you're describing a symptom and not the problem. The problem is the minimum wage and the fact that unions are allowed to be above and beyond the law, so they have special rights. You can't fire somebody in a union because they're a part of a union and they're a protected class or group of people. That's the problem. But the fact that I can buy a better car that's created in Korea or China isn't hurting the economy. It gives me the ability to spend my money in other places where we're more productive to be able to do it. You have to read Milton Friedman, and I know you said don't read them or that they're not right, but Milton Friedman is correct that productivity is best where it's able to be produced the least expensive, and that each economy should be able to produce what is being produced.
I've
the
read,
best
you know,
most
and I've read Friedman, and I agree with him in theory, but that means we all play by the same rules.
If you were right, why isn't the long-term unemployment rate going up after all these industries are dying? This is not the case. You're seeing that
It
people
is.
actually are
It is.
transitioning. So long-
It is. We're just counting different people differently.
Yeah, and I'm not, the first portion of you, let me first say, the first portion of your presentation was excellent, I completely agree, and I would like you to please research that, in my theory, the roaring 20s and the 30s and the 40s were horrible because socialism and minimum wages started coming in, and that's why we saw this. But I think in the last portion of your presentation, I have to be honest.
It's not the last, it's about a quarter of the
Right,
way.
this portion-
So you won't let me get to the other part.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
See, the other part actually is a little bit more refreshing and a little bit more in what you're trying to say, but you're gonna let me actually get to it.
Okay, please go ahead.
I think we have one other question.
Well, actually, it was more of a comment. I think what John's alluding to is the difference in the freedom of the markets. In the U.S. economy, because there's been distortions in the markets, whether it's government interference or regulation, which part of that extends into how the unions are allowed to, in many cases, run things and how they're given preferential treatment. That distorts the U.S. economy, and that's why you can maybe say get a $30,000 car of rough equivalency of quality from a U.S. automaker versus a foreign automaker. If you think about the foreign automaker, they have to get everything over here. They have to put it across, on ocean liners going across the ocean, et cetera. So there's a larger cost involved with that because there's a higher labor cost in the U.S. and there's a lower labor cost there, but there's more cost getting the product to it. So, I think
And it depends on the product.
right.
Okay?
Oh, absolutely.
The other thing too, and this is where Friedman's wrong, is you gotta be playing by the same rules. Now in China, and I do business with companies in China, you know the Chinese companies don't pay their workers? The government pays all Chinese workers. The companies pay the government to basically rent the labor. So when you get product made for you in China, there is no labor cost. So for example, if you take a shirt and you make that shirt here, let's presume that woven cotton costs roughly the same amount of money to grow it, get it out of the farm, weave it into cloth, and you've got a skein of cloth here and a skein of cloth here, one in China, one here. Well, now you've got to turn it into a shirt. Well, the cost to turn it into a shirt in China is 0. The cost to turn that into a shirt here is 20. Okay? We are not playing by the same rules. Okay? And that's the thing Friedman, developed his theories at a time when the global economy played by the same rules because giant socialist economies like China, India, and many other parts of the world weren't competing with us. So it was real easy to operate in that vacuum. But when you're dealing in a world economy that has 2 billion workers compared to our 200 million, we cannot compete. There is no way we will ever equalize things. And as long as we can't, then we're in trouble. Now, what do? You very aptly put unions, high labor costs, government intervention, all these things. I own a business, trust me. I have Uncle Sam's, hand and Uncle Patrick's hands in every pocket. In fact, I have to wear a vest with extra pockets because they run out of places to put them. Okay, it makes me absolutely want to vomit when I think of how much money I give this state, blah blah blah. Now you start talking about waste. All right, unions. Let's just say unions had a great place in this country 90, 100 years ago when you could tell how long someone worked in a profession by how many fingers he had left. There's reasons for organized labor. Guess what? We did manage to come up with labor laws and a reasonable system of mitigating those risks. But when you take, and this first happened in the steel industry, when the companies who spent so much money on unions and negotiations and lawyers and everything else, they could no longer modernize their factories. There was nothing left after they paid for all the graft and inefficiency. So finally, it reached a breaking point in the first oil crisis in '73, when the cost of producing steel went through the roof because of energy costs. The steel industry owners finally said, you all have to take a pay cut. They said to the unions, we are going out of business if you don't take a 10% pay cut. And so the unions said, nope. So rather than everybody taking a 10% pay cut, half of them took a 100% pay cut. Okay, which is exactly, I don't care what happens to my neighbor as long as I don't lose my 10%.
And that was the GM plant back in the 1980s in Framingham. It was the
GM?
same union thing. They were negotiating, and GM said, look, you can take a cut and keep your jobs and keep the plant open. They said no, and guess what? The Framingham GM plant, no more.
Exactly. And where are cars made in this country now? Tennessee, Alabama, Canada, Ohio, and Mexico.
And I remember that because I toured that plant as a high school kid.
Okay, how many of you love Twinkies?
It's same thing.
Okay, personally, I never understood it, but it is the only substance man has ever produced that can survive nuclear winter. If we ever have a giant global nuclear, cataclysm, have Twinkies in your basement, you will survive for eons.
You mean you guys don't?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I mean, seriously, come on.
Personally, it was ring dings, but But here's another case where you had a factory in Texas losing money year after year after year, making Twinkies. And they said to the union, look, we can't, it isn't even a matter of fat cats getting fat and people making too much money and those pig executives, taking all the money. It's, no, losing money. That there's no more pie to divvy up. And they said, we're going out of business if you don't take a pay cut. Their brilliant union leadership said, nope, no pay cut. No more Twinkies.
Just a quick comment. Actually, what was very interesting about the Twinkie situation was that there was a company, an investment firm that took them over that was trying to save the company from a pro, we want to save the company type situation. We want to do the best thing for the workers. So it was actually a very pro-labor group that had taken over the company, was trying to turn it around, but they still could not deal with the unions because the unions would not budge, period.
Well, and again, that's ignorance.
On whose part?
And
Laborers.
yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm not talking about greed on the corporate side. I'm looking at greed on the labor side. Okay, because
It's the same people who will pay $600 for a Japanese-made television rather than buy the American-made television for $1,200. It's the same screw your neighbor attitude. Are you
How many-
surprised?
absolutely.
We're all human.
how many of you own an iPhone or an Apple phone? Okay, how many versus how many Droids or Motorola's?
I used to until they changed the OS, and then I couldn't stand it anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do have to produce better products. I mean, that was one of the lessons of the '70s. You can't make crap. You can't, you can't make cars that blow up. But Apple, here's another one. No one thinks when I buy an Apple product, I'm screwing my neighbor. Apple did $146 million in sales last year, made $1 billion in sales, made a $50 billion profit. 1/3, it was like 27.9%. net profit. That's insane. That's like an ATM machine, just throwing money out. You know how many jobs they employ, how many people they employ in the US? 50,000.
Productive group.
They're roughly the size of Walmart, and they employ like 1%. Walmart employs well, it's very different, granted, it's very different, but you look at $50 billion in profit. You know how many Apple products are made in this country? 0. Not one single Apple product is made in this country.
Where are they designed?
China, all China.
Where are they designed? Where are they created?
They're engineered in California.
Right. Here.
Here.
Ask Ken about his neighbor down the street, IPG Photonics. The world headquarters, laser manufacturers, owned by a Russian scientist. They're growing like there's no tomorrow. In this country, in this state, your neighbor just down the street.
Sure.
In Oxford.
But because they're doing something better.
Ask Ken about his company, growing.
And cannot ever find enough skilled labor, ever.
Right.
We could hire 5 or 6 more skilled machinists if we could find them, but we can't.
And why not? Why can't we find them? You know why?
We wipe
You know
those
what?
skills out.
No, we don't teach it anymore. We teach social, it's okay to be not sure if you're a boy or a girl. It's okay if you're pregnant in junior high school. What, are you laughing? You don't believe it?
No, we don't. We don't teach actual stuff
We
anymore.
don't, it doesn't matter anymore. Because you can now go out and get an EBT card and do whatever you want.
I agree.
It's not because he wants to buy the better product or the cheaper product. It's because the government is out of control. It's a fraud. It's a fraud.
Absolutely. Well, when our education system, when we do things like No Child Left Behind, which basically dumbs down our curriculum so that everyone can pass and doesn't do anything for the gifted child that can help them excel and develop advanced skills, of course we're screwed.
The federal government should get out of education.
No,
Right back to
The
the
federal government should get out of everything. But, however, the problem we have is, and Ken, you're gonna have to wave at me when I'm running out of time here.
We're getting close. I say another 5-6 minutes.
Okay. The thing is, we have other issues. Okay, one, education is another one. We are not developing skills. The Chinese education system, socialist or not, is very astute, because what they do is when you're like a youngster, you begin aptitude testing. And if you have a natural aptitude to be a mathematician, to be an artist, to be a craftsman, your educational path is mapped.
Yeah, we should do that.
So you go through, we don't know. You're being sarcastic.
I'm not. I believe people should choose their own path and not the government should choose it for them. Oh, I'm crazy.
No, they don't know. They are allowed.
Oh, okay. They're allowed.
They're not, the gun is not held to their head. But the point is, they are developing people's curriculum based on their potential, not based on the lowest common denominator. Okay? The other thing is,
we take care of the athletic athletes in our schools.
we take care of those who don't produce. It's about producing. It's about contributing to the fiber and fabric of society, the economy, etc. That can't be done without education. Yeah.
You know, they're thinking about the whole education. When we were in school, you get an A, you get a B. When I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, now everyone has to be the same. It's that emphasis on fairness and kind of utopian, socialistic.
That's pure socialism.
Mediocrity. And so you're right, the gifted child is being ignored. There's such a need to look at differences to the degree where if you have if you just have one shift, everybody has to be the same. And I'm a therapist, and I hear this from clients and parents that tell me about their kids and the schools, and I wouldn't send my kids to these schools now.
It's horrific.
with our country, income inequality.
See-
The National Labor Review Board, you know, the whole thing we have even with Boeing, recently Boeing managed to get their contract. The unions, because they almost left, I think the state of Washington totally. It's all this need to have everything be equal, the unions reign, even in the schools.
I agree.
Yeah.
You know, the problem is we as a society condemn difference.
Right.
Okay, as opposed to say, okay, you and I can debate economic theory all day long, but we have to be able to agree to disagree, and we have to say, well, how do we balance all interests? Okay, because whether we like it or not, there are other economic forces in the world who prey upon our weaknesses. The fact that we will buy that $600 TV, they're going to take as much money as we will send them. Okay? Whether we like it or not. Now, what can we do? Well, but I think it was funny. I talked to Patrick Humphreys on the phone and he was, oh, you're Patrick? Okay. And he says, you aren't going to be all doom and gloom, are you? I said, no. He says, you know, can we ever get out of this? Well, yeah, we can get out of it, but it requires a level of unselfishness. Okay? It requires participating in the consumer economy at the minimal level possible. Save your money. Buy American. There is a huge, if you go look online, there is a huge, you know, a Buy American movement around the country. The other thing we have to do, besides supporting our neighbor, is we have to protect intellectual property. What has driven our economy for all of its success, for our history as a country, is our ability to innovate. The ability to innovate comes from respecting differences, embracing other points of view, looking at a guy like Nikola Tesla like he's brilliant, not like he's a nut. Just because you don't understand what he's doing today doesn't mean it may not be a contribution tomorrow and therefore is entitled to some protection. Today, intellectual property, whether it be patents, trademarks, copyrights, etc., is only protected to the extent to which you can afford to defend it. If your neighbor comes up with a better mousetrap than you, or you come up with a better mousetrap and your neighbor, and you can't afford the legal fees, your neighbor can just sit there and rip it off, and too bad. You cannot afford to fight it. Okay? Our intellectual property protection system in this country has to be reformed. Now that's part and parcel to education and innovation. This whole country was founded on the premise of free thinking, carving out our own destiny, and preserving and protecting the ideas of the individual. And until we are willing to make our sacrifices ourselves in choosing how we spend our money, where we spend our money, how we invest our time and energy, and upholding some level of moral compass, then we aren't ever going to get out of this. Because unless we start to look out for our neighbors, unless this country becomes a community again, then we are in trouble. Other than that, I don't know if we have any time for questions, Ken, but I'm done blabbering.
We better get.
Okay. Well, I thank you for all your hospitality.
Oh, meat and potato sacks questions, don't worry.
Thank you very much.
Hey!
Is this thing on? Can you hear me? Everybody knows I speak very loudly and very clearly, and that is why I have risen to such prominence in the Worcester Tea Party.
It's Matt from Marlboro, if you're not familiar.
I never met him before.
The Matt from Marlboro.
Yes. Yes, I have earned the V.
He does look like.
Actually, that's a good state rep.
Does look like Bill Clinton.
I do feel your pain.
Bite your upper lip.
All right, a challenge that is the Worcester Tea Party, all the Tea Party movements are facing, is instilling patriotism in the young, is getting that seed of love of country in the hearts of young people, to get our message to the next generation of patriots. Our next speaker is a man who's worked tirelessly in doing that here in this state. He has been bringing this message to colleges and universities, to the people who we really should be referring to as the next generation of leaders of our Commonwealth and our nation. Nathan Fatal recently graduated from UMass with a degree in political science and a minor in Spanish. During his time at UMass, he founded and ran the New England Objectivist Society. Nathan helped forge links between conservative and libertarian groups on campus. Nathan distributed hundreds of copies of the books of Ayn Rand, sharing her insights with many that had never heard of them before. Nathan is still focused on young people, but has expanded his activities locally and statewide. Nathan continues to work to activate young people's civic sense and to help them join political movements so that they can do their part in the patriotic cause of liberty. Nathan Fatal.
Nathan, were you involved with Still Gun?
I don't know who that is, sorry.
Okay.
So how's everyone doing? Thanks for having me. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here. So my voice hasn't cracked in a few hours. If it does, I apologize. I am a little bit sick. And I'm new to this public speaking thing, so please be patient with me. Now, as Matt said, I recently graduated. And by recently, I mean about a day or two ago. That's when my last I graduated early, but it was an accident because I got ahead on credits. I didn't know it was happening. It just happened. So that very last, well, I'll basically what I'm going to do here, I'll give you a quick introduction, and then I'll go back into the context, is I'll tell you a little bit about what I did during my time at UMass, and then I'll tell you about what I'm doing right now, and then what you can do to help me. Or not me specifically, but us as a whole.
What?
Well, I don't like
I'm
that.
sorry.
I don't like that word.
Hey, this is an interesting juxtaposition. Buy your neighbor's products and the religion of selfishness.
Well, I'm not gonna. Thankfully for all of you, I'm not gonna get into religion
You guys ought to start fighting here.
or economics. What I am gonna do is talk about how I've gradually gotten better at messaging, at marketing liberty, if you will. So real quick with the boring stuff or less interesting stuff, I did start the New England Objectivist Society, and basically what we did was we handed books out. We had meetings, but not a lot of people went to them, and I'll get into that. But I want to give you some context. I want to give you some background, the context that I've been in for 3.5 years. 3.5, not 4. So my last class, the last class ever, that I just got my grade back from, was at Mount Holyoke College. It was called Pivotal Ideas, Conservatism. And I don't know how much you know about Mount Holyoke College, or UMass for that matter, but UMass is in the habit of only hiring Marxists for their econ department. And Mount Holyoke is in the habit of churning out feminists like it's nobody's business. So I was sitting, every Thursday I had a class with, I don't know, 12 or so girls and the professor who was also a woman, all of whom were basically the same. They all had this preconceived notion that anything having anything to do with our founding principles and with rational self-interest and with freedom is bad. Don't worry, this context is important. So we covered a lot of different thinkers, and there was always this really negative tone, and it was that, oh my God, conservatives. they must be bad. They want lower taxes, and then how would we pay for all the free healthcare? So it was tough. Being at UMass was tough, and this class at Mount Holyoke was tough. The hardest part, though, was when we came to the section on Ayn Rand and Friedrich Hayek, because that is a section that had the least to do with logic and the most to do with emotion. And the professor spent a lot of time saying, well, I don't like those thinkers because they don't really get what it means to be human. And she never challenged their logic, she never challenged their economics, she never challenged anything that they actually said. She just said, they don't get what it means to be human. So I spend most of my time in that class basically like this.
Did you pass and did you speak up?
I did speak up. I got a lot of funny looks. I got some interesting comments on my papers, but ultimately, I felt like my contributions were somewhat valued, and I got an A.
Good for you.
So how does that tie into what I've been doing? Well, the way it ties in is that is not anything new in any way, shape, or form. For 4 years, 3.5, really forever, but especially in the last 3.5 years, this is all I've heard. In every class, in every way, shape, and form, in every department, everywhere, it's saturated with this mentality that our lives don't belong to us. And I'll give you a few examples. Sorry, it's been a long week. I haven't done a ton of preparation, so I will be looking down a little bit. So I'll give you a few examples. I had a TA who insisted that we need to ban the financial markets. I had a professor who said that if you're an alcoholic, you caught the alcoholism disease, you're not responsible for that. I had, the list goes on. Let's see, who else was there? I had an anthropology professor who insisted that America was an evil empire. I had 40 occupiers hijack a lecture that I hosted with a speaker from the Ayn Rand Institute.
Jesus.
I had to fight the SGA so I could put up my own flyers without their logo on it. This is the kind of stuff I dealt with every day, and it really was the same every day, and I never forgot about it because every day there would be hundreds of people that just passed by when I was tabling or doing whatever with this deer in headlights stare. And part of the reason is because I was doing it wrong, and I'll get to that. But there it goes.
Well, Marco Rubio moment.
I took the label off. So all of those professors and ignorant students and whoever else, there was a shared theme. And it was that your life does not belong to you. It belongs to other people. It belongs to everyone else but you. It belongs to your neighbors. It belongs to a race, a country, whatever. You can put it however you want, but it doesn't belong to you. And that was the assumption that they always made, and they never even articulated it because it's been around for thousands of years. Why articulate something that everyone knows? We all grew up with it. So that's where I came in. My project for the last 3.5 years has been to figure out just how to market this idea that your life does in fact belong to you. That you're the master of your own life, of your own wallet, of your own bedroom, that you should not be told what to do by the government or a church or whatever. Your life is yours. Right, John?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, it was hard. It was really hard, and it continues to be hard. For a long time, I would spend hours upon hours tabling with no response. People would just walk by. I would speak up in classes and be laughed at either by fellow students or by professors. I would write papers which challenged preconceived norms about healthcare, things like that, just assuming that everyone has a right to it. And I'll get these vicious comments back from TAs. One of them insisted that there shouldn't be banks. Go figure. I would email people and get no response. I could go on, and there were so many reasons to be discouraged, but I just kept going because every now and then I saw hope. And that's when in those few moments when I saw hope, I realized that I was doing something wrong. And what I was doing wrong is that I was trying to preach to a choir that wasn't there. And I'll tie this into the Tea Party and what we're all trying to accomplish together, because the problem with that is it's great to find people we agree with. That's what I want to do. But we have to do more than just get a bunch of people who agree with each other in the same room. We can all do a lot of things together, but not as much as we can do if we enlarge the choir that we're preaching to, if you will. So that's what I was doing wrong. Is that... Sorry. That I was always out there passing out copies of Atlas Shrugged and just hoping that there would be people who have already read it. Be like, oh, you've read that, then we agree on things, we should be friends. And it didn't occur to me until much later that I had to appeal to something deeper in all people to be able to get more people to agree with me, not just reach the ones I already agreed with. So I kept giving out books, but I changed my approach a little bit. I started talking to students about who they are, what they study, things like that. Anyone read Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People? Very good, sir. It's a great book. There's a lot of repetition, it's kind of dry. He gets a few things wrong. But the point is that people want to be recognized for their values, right? And everyone deep down has that value of wanting to be, well, okay, most people, even really deep down, want to be self-sufficient in some regard. They're in college, maybe just because they want to escape from their parents, or they're taking a job just because they don't want to be at home. Maybe they have really superficial reasons for doing what they do, but everyone wants to be in control of their own life. So somehow, based on what I got from each person in 5 to 20 seconds, I would tailor the message differently and convince someone who I've never met before, who has never heard of Ayn Rand or Atlas Shrugged or this explicit idea that their life belongs to them, that they should read this, or that they should just consider what I have to say. And something changed. So instead of meeting people who I agreed with, I made more people who I agreed with. And all of a sudden the mailing list started growing, and I was turning all these people away from the table. Well, that sounded bad. I was sending all these people back to their dorm rooms with a copy of Atlas Shrugged and with a genuine interest in reading it that they didn't have before. So that's one stage of improvement.
What did you do different? We want to know.
Okay, well, what I did different is I started out by just assuming that there would be other people around that would just agree with me. I just wanted to be in an echo chamber, basically. I just wanted to be able to preach